We can now bring in Frank Ledwidge, former military intelligence officer and senior lecturer in strategy at Portsmouth University. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us on the program today. Israel's prime minister says Israel is in control of the skies over Tehran. Has Israel really weakened Iranian air defenses to this point?
Yes, good afternoon. Certainly that seems to be the case. I think that Iranian air defenses have run short of options. Their main mitigation now really will be passive defences, which is to say moving the various targets insofar as they can around the country. The main targets now, of course, being ballistic missile batteries and, of course, the nuclear enrichment facilities you just mentioned, which aren't really mobile. So to answer your question, yes, they've got control of the air now over Iran, and there's not too much the Iranians can do about it.
The Israelis are telling citizens of the capital, Tehran, to leave. Tehran, I checked, has a population of some 10 million people. What military infrastructure is in Tehran?
The same kind of infrastructures you're going to get in any civilized or well-developed capital. You're going to have the various bodies and ministries of defense. There will be bunker systems there, as there are in London, as there are in Washington, D.C., in Paris, and every major well-developed city. There will be intelligence headquarters. Some of those already been struck. Just yesterday, the IRGC got a hit, and they'll be getting some more. There are barracks too. There will be the IRGC Basij units, which is the sort of militia unit, will be used for repression in the event of any kind of uprising. And, of course, Quds Force, which has already taken a few hits as well. I mean, the list could go on. There's also the headquarters of the Army, Navy and Air Force, which aren't part of the IRGC. So there's a long list of targets, and the Israelis are going to be going through them over the next few days.
The director of the IAEA spoke earlier today. I just want you to take your listen to what Rafael Grossi had to say concerning Israeli strikes on Natanz.
There has been no additional damage at the Natanz fuel enrichment plant site since the Friday attack. The level of radioactivity outside the Natanz site has remained unchanged and at normal levels, indicating no external radiological impact to the population or the environment from this event.
Frank Ledwidge, let me bring you in once again. What do we know about these Israeli strikes on Natanz? How successful were they? And can Israel do this under international law?
Yes, I think they're fairly solid under international law, under the very simple rationale of anticipatory self-defense. It's a bit of a long argument, and there'd be arguments about it, but my view would be, yes, it's justifiable. Whether, of course, it's politically correct or politically right or proper or even strategic is another matter. But concerning the Natanz installation, and indeed some of the other targets that are being struck and will be struck, one thing we have to remember, Israel is very keen to avoid the kind of problem that the IAEA representative there raised, that is to say, radiological leakage. Israel is not short of experts. We'll be able to advise them on exactly where to strike to cause the maximum damage to enrichment capabilities with the minimum collateral in terms of radiological leaks.
Was Iran in the process of developing a nuclear weapon? Because back in March, we had the U.S. Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, who said that the United States, that the American Intelligence Committee had assessed that Iran was not actively pursuing a nuclear weapon. So which is it?
I don't know, and I don't know that anybody outside those two intelligence agencies know. The view taken by Ms. Gabbard is a consistent view from the American intelligence community, and the view taken by the current Israeli government is consistent view throughout the governments over the last decade as well. My view is that they're on a path to, for what it's worth, is that they're on a path to enrichment. They have certainly not achieved that yet, and I don't think they're even in the last stages of it. But I think Israel's point is it was only a matter of time.
But if there was a deal struck with the United States, there would be the case for inspections to make sure the nuclear program was not going rogue, was not going out of control, right?
Yeah, that's certainly right. And under the JCPOA, which first Trump government abrogated, there was, of course, at least the beginnings of an inspection regime that seemed to be working. And I think there's a fair argument to be made that very little efforts have been made to restart that, or indeed to impose such a regime right now, largely due, of course, to be fair, due to the lack of faith on the part of the international community, the Iranians would abide with it. But there we have it.
Israel has a lot of high-tech, heavy weaponry. We know this, heavy U.S. weaponry in its arsenal as well, yet it hasn't struck Fordo. Can Israel do this without U.S. involvement, or will they require heavy U.S. bombers because Fordo is so deep underground?
Yes, you raise an excellent point there. That's correct. So in a yes or no binary, the answer is no, they can't destroy the Fordo facility, which is buried between 80 and 100, as far as we know, between 80 and 100 meters under several layers of protection, without the really heavy bombs that the US and only the US can deploy, short of nuclear weapons, of course. Israel has nothing like the GBU-57, for example, which can penetrate to 60 meters. But it wouldn't be just one strike in any event. You'd need multiple strikes to ensure the destruction of the facility. There's no way Israel can apply that kind of explosive force just now on that facility.
Stay with us because we have a report on how Israel is using its Iron Dome defense system to intercept the vast majority of missiles and drones launched from Iran. Take a look.
To combat Iran's barrage of missiles and drones, Israel needs more than its much-vaunted Iron Dome defense system. Developed by the Israeli arms manufacturer Rafael, Iron Dome is 95% effective, but only against short-range rockets fired at Israel from Gaza, the occupied territories, or Lebanon. For medium-range missiles, Israel uses David Sling, also produced by Rafael, and Arrow 3, which handles long-range ballistic missiles fired by Iran or the Houthis from Yemen. Added to these recently has been Iron Beam, a laser used to intercept drones and rockets. The shortfall in interceptions is made up by Air Force fighter jets. Though this is mostly effective, the Israeli military acknowledges it has its limitations.
The IDF is deploying its finest systems to minimize casualties, but there is no such thing as complete protection.
The network of systems is also vulnerable to hypersonic missiles of the kind Iran has launched in recent days and to being overwhelmed by a flood of salvos. After Iran breached Israel's defences with about 180 ballistic missiles last October, the United States sent a Terminal High Altitude Area Defence, or THAAD, battery to Israel. A second one followed earlier this year. The US has also shot down Iranian missiles in the past few days using warships based in the Persian Gulf, while Israel's neighbour Jordan has also intercepted missiles that have breached its own airspace. Some analysts have suggested that Israel may be running low on interceptors, giving greater incentive to Benjamin Netanyahu's government to further degrade Iran's aerial capabilities.
Frank Ledwidge, let me bring you in once again. Unlike the tit-for-tat strikes we saw between Iran and Israel last year, this time we see that Iran is striking targets in cities in Israel. What's different this time around? Yes, the Iron Dome is not 100% effective. We know this, but what is different? What is Iran using that's different?
They have the option of using some of their ballistic missiles, particularly the older Shahed versions, which viewers will know as the Scuds, effectively as decoys. It's not quite as simple as that, but let's call it that. And using the more advanced and formidable weapons, the Al-Qassem, for example, Hajj Qassem, I should say, missile, for example, as the strike weapons. And let's remember, and this goes right back to the start of the report, if you're struck by one of those, it's half a ton of high explosive with very high kinetic energy, so it's going to cause a lot of damage, disproportionate, you might think, to the amount of explosive in the rocket itself. So and that accounts, I think, for the level of surprise in Israel. But let's look on the positive side. Israel intercepts between 93 and 90, according to who you believe, and 96% of incoming missiles. And what, again, on the positive side from the Israeli perspective, the interception rate is very high and their systems work very well. But the variable, as your excellent report there summarised, is how long can Israel's arsenal of interceptors last without reloads mostly from the US, from the Rafael company and its partners in the US, from the various other companies that supply these missiles, the THAAD, the Arrows, the Iron Dome, David Sling, all have US suppliers. The question is, how many will the Americans, or what capacity have the Americans to supply them, and the will to deplete US arsenals to the extent they do? So it's a race essentially between the Israeli Defense Forces, the Air Force, to knock out the launchers before they launch the weapons, and from the Iranian perspective, being able to overwhelm the remaining Israeli interceptors. Now, these are variables on neither side. We know the details, but that's the fight that's going on as we speak, and that's going to continue tonight, tomorrow morning, and throughout this week, and probably next, until it becomes clear which side has run out first.
It does seem that way, given that Israeli airlines have suspended operations till early next week. I want to talk about the number of missiles, because earlier today we had reports from Iran that they launched some 200 missiles directed at Israel. There are reports that Iran has 2,000 missiles in its arsenal. Is that correct? And if so, it too will run out if it keeps up with these numbers.
That's right, and they're being attrited, as the word goes, to being worn down to very high rate. The Israelis think they've got about 50% of the launches so far. But look, on the other hand, the Israelis have spent many years preparing for this operation and to defend themselves against the response, and that response is extremely capable and competent. Let's not forget, this is well, of course, it is an operational surprise for the Iranians, but it's not a strategic surprise. They've been building up this arsenal and the means to defend, hide, move it around for the last few years as well. And we're seeing the result of that. I must say, I was quite surprised this morning that they were able to deliver that level of assault on Israel, which has turned out to be reasonably, at least from the political perspective, less so from the military perspective, quite successful. But I do think over the next few days we're going to see that rate of launch reduce. And what you're looking at your screen now, by the way, are interceptions above the environment, above the atmosphere, by Israeli missiles, the so-called Arrow missiles. Extremely interesting to see those, the way they work. But let's see how long Iran can last. They have a large arsenal. They've been building it up for years, and they know how to, or at least in theory, they know how to defend it. I suspect the Israelis will get the upper hand over the next few days, but we will see. We'll see how much of the Iranian arsenal survives. There's so much in this which is secret, which is not obviously secret, but also which we don't even know the starting points. How many missiles the Iranians have, how many missiles or launchers have the Israelis destroyed, and what plans the Israelis have, what sortie rate they can continue to put out, and of course, most importantly, and you see there on the screen again, the rate at which the Israeli counter-missile systems, missile defense systems being depleted.
You raise an interesting point, because while we're talking about Iran, we also have Iranian proxies in the region, and this is Hezbollah in Lebanon, which has been significantly weakened after last year. But we also have the Houthis in Yemen. So do we know how many stockpiles they have?
Once again, I would suspect they have a fairly considerable arsenal. This is not a strategic surprise to Iran. It's an operational surprise. In other words, they knew it was coming at some point, and they will have mitigated against what they felt, and rightly, would be an extremely formidable Israeli assault by dispersal to the Houthis, and of course, before last October, and the Israeli operation, appropriately named New Order, to Hezbollah. We've not seen much from the Houthis, and we've seen, needless to say, nothing worthwhile from Hezbollah since the Israelis defanged them last October, as essentially as a strategic precursor to this operation itself, because the main weapon of Iran was not its indigenous sort of or home-based ballistic missile stocks, but were the stocks in Lebanon, and that weapon was taken out, as you say, last year. So let's see. I don't think the Houthis have either the capability or the capacity to cause serious damage to Israel, but there certainly have been over the last few days and will continue to be an irritant they, of course, have their own priorities in this regional conflict.
And last week we did have the port of Hodeidah that was struck by Israel in Yemen. So Israel clearly anticipated its move when it came to targeting Iran. Now, Israel has this fight that is now brewing with Iran, but at the same time, the war in Gaza continues. Hamas is not defeated. How many fronts can Israel fight on, realistically?
They proved themselves to be able to fight on the 4 or 5 fronts that they're doing so now. Question is how long, I suppose that's the heart of what you're asking, is how long can they sustain this? And I think they can sustain it for a long time. And we're talking here months, if not years. This is existential for Israel. And one fully understands their perspective, as indeed the war in Ukraine is existential. And I think most Israelis recognize that at some point this was going to happen. And at some point, that part of the population, which is most of it, which is involved in the country's defense, would be mobilized. So they can sustain it for a considerable amount of time. The constraints, and I come back to this, are the weapon systems and the relative strength of those weapon systems, rather than the endurance of the population, which of course takes hits. As we saw this morning, both in Tehran, but more particularly and specifically in your report in Tel Aviv itself.
Yeah, it's not easy to get called to bomb shelters a number of times a day. Frank Ledwidge, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you for your analysis.
Thanks very much. Pleasure.